What's something the average American doesn't realize about poverty in America? Getting out of being poor can be impossible without outside help. If you have money to buy a decent car, you get one for say 7K used. It's gonna last you a few years because we're psychic. Your poor friend can afford that $1,700 ancient Civic. 6 months in, he has to get it fixed for $600. Don't forget his gas mileage sucks. Each year, he's throwing money at the car because it's a POS. Finally, he has to get something else because we don't have a legit public transportation system and he's got to get to work. He can't afford to fix whatever is causing it to randomly die and he's paid for it to be towed to the shady mechanic 3 times. So another 2K on another crappy car. By the time you've had your car for 6 years, he's on his 3rd car and has spent far more than you. Same thing on a small scale that your poor friend gets dog-eared by every single second. I go to Walmart and buy 24 rolls of toilet paper for $16. Well, he doesn't have $16 for toilet paper, so he gets 4 rolls for $6. So you paid $16 for 24 rolls. By the time he gets his 24 rolls, 6 times, he's bought 4 rolls, he's paid $36. Over twice what you paid. Now take the knowledge that he's getting that in every transaction. He can't afford to buy in bulk. He can't afford to buy quality shoes that will last him through 2 years. He can only afford cheap Walmart shoes that last 1 season. So he has to buy new cheap Walmart shoes every single season. And by the time your fancy shoes wear out, he spent way more on crappy Walmart shoes and has back pain from no support. It's not that he doesn't know that paying more upfront, buying in bulk or buying quality, is cheaper in the long run. It's that he hasn't had $100 in his checking out in years. He's constantly working with sums of about $50 to get through the week to the next payday. So no way can he afford even a $10 more cost. Even if it will save him $100, he needs that $10 for gas to get to work. I work a white-collar job. I had one of the security guards ask me for $5 the other day, only till he could pay me back the next day. Nothing unusual or weird about it. It was Thursday and he wanted to get a beer and go home. Why do you need $5 for a beer? Well, he was going to use that $5 for gas, a beer and a hot dog. He got paid the next day so he could pay me back then. We're literally talking about a guy who doesn't have $5 for gas. He does not live paycheck to paycheck. He lives paycheck to a few days before the next paycheck. What's the worst city you visited once and will absolutely never return? Johannesburg, South Africa, hands down. Everyone told me to avoid it at all costs, but I thought it would be fine to stay for just a night until my train left for Zimbabwe, so I figured, what the hell? When I got off the bus, I was the only white person who exited and I was immediately bombarded by cab drivers pulling my shirt, almost literally trying to drag me into their cabs. I stood my ground as they tried to remove my backpack from me. A few of them started to fight with each other, and while I don't think any punches were thrown, it started to get violent. I quickly hurried over to another cab driver who was patiently waiting a little or further back. When we started to pull out of the bus lot, another cab driver drove his cab into ours, blocking the exit. Definitely hit us hard enough for some exterior damage to the bumper, but nothing more. My driver just pushed the other car out of the way with his by putting the pedal to the floor. This all happened in about a span of 2 minutes from the time I stepped out of the bus. My heart was racing. And I had heard horror stories about how bad the witch doctor stuff around the area is, and at the time it really felt like I was going to be kidnapped and cut up into healing medicine. I was even considering trying to get out of the moving cab because I was afraid he wasn't taking me where I asked. Once I got to my hostel, there were armed guards surrounding the perimeter, which is pretty typical in heavily populated areas of South Africa, but there were definitely more at this hostel than others I had been to. The place was a total shithole, literally rats in the fridge. I had a little food to cook, but I couldn't bring myself to cook in that kitchen. After taking a few hours to calm down and collect myself, I convinced myself that I was overreacting and that it's all fine. I got the courage to walk the 1.5 miles to the nearest grocery store. The guy at the desk said it would be fine. It was not. I was such an idiot. On my walk I saw a house burning and it seemed like no one even noticed. People were just walking by it like it wasn't even happening. I felt like I was in a post-apocalyptic movie. I got harassed by 6 or 7 14-year-old school kids dressed in uniform. They went out of their way to follow me and shout the N-word at me. Some of the kids were bigger than I was, so I just looked straight and kept walking. They lingered behind me for a few hundred feet or so and were thrusting themselves at me with their fists up and laughing. It was really hard to not turn around, but I could tell they were looking for a reaction out of me and wanting an excuse for it to get physical. It was terrible. I was expecting to get a fist to the back of the head, but they eventually lost interest one at a time. Almost pissed myself. After I made it to the grocery store, I got a cab back to the hostel because I was sure the walk back would be worse as it was starting to get dark. I set up my tent in the tent area, which is right next to the 4-foot-tall wall. The wall was covered in glass, but it was kind of pointless because anyone could relatively effortlessly jump it. Around midnight I was Skyping with one of my friends back home when a gunfight started outside the wall. The shots were so loud it felt like it was happening just on the other side of the wall. I'm sure it wasn't that close, but it sure felt like I was in the middle of it. Panicked, I ran into the kitchen to find one of the staff cleaning, and I'll never forget our conversation. Me: did you hear those gunshots? Him: yeah. Me: should I be concerned? Him: were they shooting at you? Me: no. Him: then go back to bed. I don't think I slept very much that night. I spent less than 24 hours there in total, and that was way too much for me. Never again. My sister did made me ghost my entire family and fiancé. I need a little advice on the matter as I don't know what to do anymore. I was 21 when my fiancé asked me to marry him. He was the absolute light of my life. We had known each other since preschool, and our families are very close. He would come and have dinner with us on a daily basis and vice versa. He doesn't have any siblings, but I have 2 older sisters, which is very important as he was also very close with them. We grew up together. When we started dating, I don't think our parents stopped celebrating for weeks. He helped me deal with a lot of my anxiety, and even when I gained a little weight and my mother berated me saying he was going to leave me, he told her off and said he loved me for who I was, not for what I looked like, even though he claimed I was the most beautiful girl in the world to him. We were only engaged for 6 months before the incident. My middle oldest sister, let's call her Nikki, was a very cold person. She never showed any affection. She only ever opened up to my fiancé as she said she saw him as a brother, and he also helped her through a lot of her dark times, such as battling drug addictions and breaking the law. She and I never saw eye to eye. I loved her dearly because she was my sister but didn't like her as a person. Out of the blue she tells me she wants to take me clubbing as we had never been together before, and she felt bad that she was so distant to me. I agreed, and that night we went out. Clubbing wasn't really my style, but once I had a few drinks, I loosened up a little and began having fun. The night was going smoothly until Nikki spotted a guy across the room whom she claimed she wanted to climb like a tree. She walked over to him, and within a few minutes she was back and she had a sour expression on her face. I asked her what was up, but she never said anything. I kept pressing because I didn't want our night to be ruined. She then told me the guy didn't want her number but he wanted mine instead. I told her he was a loser and there were plenty of guys around who would kill to be with a girl like her. She didn't budge though. She told me she needed to use the restroom and then we would leave. I waited for another hour. During this time I was sipping on a lot of different cocktails. I then started feeling really dizzy and lightheaded. I figured I'd just cab it home as I was certain Nikki had left. On the way out though, I bumped into a friend of Nikki's whom she had briefly dated. He asked me if I needed a hand to my car and I explained I was getting a cab. He said he was getting ready to leave and we could share one. I told him okay and we walked out of the club together and into the first cab we saw. I tried to find my phone in my purse but I felt myself getting dizzier and dizzier. I don't remember what happened next as I blacked out, and the next morning I woke up on a hard sofa, my head pounding. When I came to, I realized I was in Nikki's friend's house and my phone was sitting on the glass table in front of me, but it was flat. When he noticed I was awake he offered some tablets and water and explained that I had passed out in the cab and he didn't remember my parents' address, so he just picked me up and took me back here where he laid me on the sofa. I told him I needed to go home as my fiancé would be worried. He called a cab and I left. When I arrived at my parents' house, my mother, father, Nikki, my fiancé and his parents were all standing in the living room. I thought they were worried about me, but the instant I opened my mouth my fiancé asked how could I do this to him. I tried to explain that my phone went flat, but he then went on screaming about how I could cheat on him. I was baffled. Why would he think that? I tried to explain the night's events but I kept getting cut off. Nikki then chimed in and said I was a lying ass and how could I be so heartless to a man who has been there for me through thick and thin. She went on to say I kept flirting with random guys all night, and then when she went to the bathroom, she saw me leave with her friend. I told her what had happened and she showed me photos on her phone where as we were leaving, his hand was on my back ushering me outside. Yes, the photo did look horrible and I was so drunk I didn't even realize his hand was on my back at all. My fiancé was so angry, he kept shouting and his mom and mine were both crying. I then asked Nikki to call her friend and he would confirm nothing happened, but when she called him, he told a completely different story. He said I begged him to take me back to his, and when he did, we slept together multiple times. I saw red and started crying and yelling at Nikki because I knew she had organized this whole thing to make me look bad. I begged my fiancé to believe me, but he just shook his head and left. When everyone had cleared out, my mother slapped me across the face and told me to get out. I left and went to a friend's house where I stayed for a few nights. During those nights I called my fiancé crying and pleading with him to believe me that nothing happened, but it all fell on deaf ears as he never returned any of my calls or texts. My mom texted me and told me she was kicking me out and that she couldn't believe I would do such a thing, and a lot of hurtful other slurs I don't think I could repeat here. She didn't even give me time to get my things as she threw everything out. I was now homeless. None of my family would take me in, as they chose my fiancé and mother's side. I was homeless and single in less than a day and a half. My entire world had been taken away because of Nikki's lies.